mishmash. If Jesus is God, then he was God all the way back in the Old Testament.
Yo, what's up, everybody? So I watched this video and I had to make a video on this because there was this debate that I was in. I don't even remember what it was, but I was like in there with like some of my atheist friends here on TikTok, and there were these Christians trying to say like the Old Testament doesn't matter or doesn't count. All that matters is the New Testament, and we just need to focus on that, and we can't use the Old Testament in an argument. And the weirdest thing is that these bros were also quoting from the Old Testament, so it was like we can't use it, but then they were also using it. Like, they're over here trying to excuse God from the Old Testament and say, like, that's not God, it doesn't count for God, like, you can't use the Old Testament to make arguments that God is, like, immoral, like, God was Jesus, and Jesus's legacy is what was the true God, and, like, that's what counts for God. No. That does not make sense. I don't understand why Christians try to, like, not take responsibility for the Old Testament. You could make the argument that Jesus came down and established like a new covenant, and he didn't come down to throw away the old rules, but to make like new rules, and that like Christians today in our generation are supposed to solely listen to only the New Testament and only what was Jesus's teachings. But to say that God is not accountable for like what happened in the Old Testament, no, like, let me break this down so it makes sense. If Jesus is God, they are the same thing. This is the same God that created rules in the Old Testament that justified killing homosexuals or slavery or flooding the world because people committed sin, even though that he was going to come down as Jesus and die for their sins anyway. You or any Christian that tries to like debate about Christianity or say that God is a good God and like merciful, you don't get to discount the Old Testament. That was part of God as well. So is your God a moral God? The same God that is just in the Old Testament, killing people, wiping people off the face of the earth, encouraging wars as far as like his followers were in those wars and fighting against another group of people, encouraging slavery, sending bears to maul children because they made fun of somebody who was bald. Is that God moral? And Jesus is that same God. Jesus is God in human form. So, yes, we have Jesus. We have Jesus's legacy in the New Testament, but that's the same God that was doing stuff in the Old Testament and making all the rules in the Old Testament. You have to hold him accountable for both books, New and Old Testament. Like, it was shocking to me, the leaps and the hoops that the Christians I was debating this one day were jumping through to somehow say that the Old Testament can't be used to argue against God or hold God accountable, or God is not responsible for the Old Testament. Like, that's literally their argument, and it was like the most crazy argument I've ever seen when debating Christians. It literally makes no sense.